Welcome to 21st Century Inklings. It's like we've gone over the three-act structure, all the big highlights. It's like, oh, the opening, the beginning, it's like the inciting incident, the first doorway of no return. This is like the first pinch point, the midpoint, that moment of truth, that mirror moment, depending on who you're talking to. And then start figuring some things out, and then reacting. It was like more acting rather than reacting in the second half of Act Two, having a pinch point leading down to the second doorway of no return, leading into the climax, the final resolution, climatic movement, and resolution. And so you plotted through a million things through the book that I'm working on, that I've actually started writing now, Kingdom. Sort of a love story, sort of building out more what I did in Council, which even though is probably getting chomped up along those lines. But sometimes, like, that's the idea of, okay, you get it all plotted out, and then you start writing and things start shifting. And then I'm in editing phase with Council after 207,000 words, and things shift. I've found that pretty much with every story that I've ever written. Um, and I'm not the only one. Famously, J.R.R. Tolkien mentioned on this channel before, one of the original 20th century Inklings, um, no, wrote and rewrote his stories, ultimately leading to his Legendarium. While it's got all fragmented parts, depending on, which means his son Christopher had a huge task when he got done dealing with his father's estate. Um, so that, yeah, going from The Hobbit to The Lord of the Rings was 17 years. Granted, there was something called a world war in the middle of that, but um, so it wasn't like he wasn't doing lots of stuff, plus teaching and all of those things. It's like, is another one that keeps changing his plans, legendarily. It's like, oh, it's like Winds of Winter will be out in a year, 2 years. It's like the end of the time the end of the, you know, Game of Thrones series is over. And here it is a few years later, and still to be determined. Because things have shifted, both from his original plan and what he thought he was doing from the end of the last book, and how he's got to bridge what last book, this penultimate book, and the next book. So there's things is how do you deal with it when you, so big three steps is like you're stuck in that middle, is like, okay, things have shifted, what do you do next? What you think is going to happen next versus what really happens next. You can keep going, it's like powering through just one step at a time, pants a bit. You can replot using index cards. You can skip ahead and then you have to fill in. Kind of did that a little bit with Council because I wrote it in my notebook, but I didn't necessarily put it in Scrivener immediately, which is why part of this is like partially the initial draft, almost zero vomit draft of Council is a bit disjointed because there's parts that made sense when I was writing it, but then getting it from my notebook to Scrivener, it changed again. And I was like, now that I'm going back and reading the whole thing, it's going to change again. I'm looking at the word counts and potential editing costs. Because of being so long, it would probably make more sense to self-publish rather than to publish as like traditionally publish. To cut down on that, maybe I split into three, which maybe makes I can develop some things a little more. So 200,000 ends up being like 300,000 by the time the full story is over. But and maybe look back as like, okay, I plotted it this way. Let's try a different method to plot it. Or let's look primarily at the characters, as it were, it's like in their motivations. Are they popping off the page? How do you rewrite them so they're popping off the page? And that can happen at various stages. It can happen right there in the middle. Is like go from plotting. It's just like this makes sense here, but maybe I replot before I even start drafting, or it changes in the middle of drafting, or it changes again in editing. Some never keep stopping. You can jump ahead. You can keep going, jumping ahead. You can, and then I can go back and fill in. You can replot, and the rubber meets the road in taken in small little chunks. Hence why I've only mentioned lots of phrasal. It's like, okay, phrase one, phrase two, phrase three, phrase four, phrase 800. Because it's like, okay, almost as a little, you know, bit to get from one part to the next. If you have any other thoughts on that, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Please hit subscribe and see you in the next one. Happy writing!